Good afternoon, and welcome to Expose Yourself to Art, a show that looks at the creative process by inviting artists to join us in a chat about their life and their work. My name is David Schrader, and my usual partner, Linda Scheller, is off pursuing her own art today. So it's just me and my guest, and my guest today is, I thought I had a banner here to show you, but wait a minute. We'll put her name up so I can introduce her properly here. There we go. Sarah Stevenson. Sarah Stevenson is a writer, an artist, editor, and graphic designer in Northern California. She is the author of 3 young adult books. She is also an active blogger, and since 2005, she's been posting children's literature reviews and information at Finding Wonderland, a blog she shares with fellow young adult author Tanita S. Davis, and she is a regular participant in the Sybil's Award, an all-volunteer children's book award organized by bloggers. So, without further ado, let's invite Sarah on and she can tell us more about herself. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. That's great. So, without putting away the written intro, how about giving us a little bit of information about yourself? Where you come from? Let's start there.
Well, I grew up in Southern California. I was born and raised down south and moved up to Northern California for school to attend UC Berkeley, and eventually found myself here in Modesto when my husband got a teaching job at Modesto Junior College. So I've been here since 2001.
Okay. So when did your interest in art start? I see artist and author. Were those things always present in your life, or tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I've always been a reader. I was a pretty early reader. My mom always read to me and taught me how to read early on. So books were always a big part of my life. And I also always loved to draw. So I think just about as long as I can remember, I've been trying to put something on paper in images or words, or sometimes both.
Okay. So drawing and writing for your whole life. Yeah.
About.
Yeah. So was this something you pursued in college as well? Were those your majors in college?
Yeah. Well, so I started off with more of an intention of going into visual art, like possibly illustration or graphic design. So as an undergraduate, I majored in art, and I had a double major in psychology as well. And then I went on to get a 1-year post-baccalaureate certificate in printmaking at the San Francisco Art Institute, because that was the medium that I was really gravitating towards at the time. So particularly block printing and etching, or intaglio. And then after working for a few years out in the world, I found myself coming back to writing as a part of my job, and then thinking to myself that this was something that I really kind of also wanted to pursue. So I went back to school and got a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from Mills College in Oakland. And from there, I've been trying to juggle my various interests and do as much as I can with them.
Oh, great. So when we just met before we went on the air, you mentioned that your father wasn't sure if he wanted you to go into the arts. Is there a story there?
Well, not a really exciting one, but I think that he was pretty set on me doing something a lot more practical. He probably would have wanted me to go into law or medicine or science. And unfortunately I did, and he's an engineer. That would have also been okay. And I just didn't have an interest in any of that, at the time. So it was a little, for while I was in school and majoring in art, there was a little bit of tension there, but I think once I started actually getting out into the working world and doing, you know, reasonably well and, having something to show for it, I think, you know,
Right.
opinions change.
Right. It's a very common story, with
Mhm.
a lot of artists. We start out with an interest in art and we think that what we can make a living with that, and then we run into the cold reality of everyday life. You know, uh, yeah, I remember myself thinking, if you would have asked me when I was, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years old, I would have said, no, I'm going to grow up and be an artist. And
Mhm.
then somewhere around high school, it's like, oh my gosh, my dad said, well, what are you going to do to make a living? You know,
Mhm.
I've just heard the same story from, a lot of people. So congratulations on being able to make a living doing what you love doing in the arts.
Thanks. I mean, I wouldn't say that I make my living at it, but it's certainly a big part of my work.
Yeah. So, and reading your bio, uh, you've written 3 young adult novels.
Mhm.
So tell me about young adult novels. When did this interest, how did this interest come up? How did you get into that particular genre as opposed to writing just general novels?
Right. So when I entered grad school, I was basically doing general fiction, entering as a fiction writer. I didn't have a specific idea of going into young adult, but I knew that there were classes that the Mills College department offered in young adult, and so uh, my second year of the program, I decided to try that out because it seemed interesting to me. In part because as a young adult and as a kid, I did probably some of the most reading I've ever done in my life. um, I just was a bookworm. And so to me, that was a formative time period. And the more I thought about it, I also realized for a lot of other people, that is a formative time period where a lot of people decide to either become lifelong readers or just, put down books forever and give up reading essentially for pleasure. So I started to feel like that was an area that I could make a difference with my writing. Um, and the themes that I write about also seemed to fit really well with the young adult area. I like to write about self discovery, learning to get to know yourself. Um, those kinds of themes fit really well with that
Uh-huh.
age group.
Yeah. So you also mentioned, you mentioned going to the Art Institute and studying printmaking and things like that. Um, what made you lean over towards writing as opposed to going and becoming a visual artist? I mean, you still do some of that, I understand. But,
Yes, yes. So, well, some of it is really just a matter of not only having so many hours in the day and
sure.
only so much energy to devote. And so, in one sense, while I was focusing on the writing, I felt like I really needed to um, put my efforts towards improving that area for a while. And I was also getting some minor successes, in that area. I started off after graduating um, from grad school, I started to do some freelance work. Um, and so I was doing some essentially paid web content writing for a few different places. One of those is A Place for Mom, which I mean I don't know if you've seen their commercials. It's a senior living referral site, and for several years I was one of their regular writers and posted 2 or 3 articles a week there.
Hmm.
And so my work like that started to fill in my time, and then at the same time I was doing graphic design work, and that's kind of where my visual energies were going.
Ah,
So the fine art became a little bit more sporadic, but it's something that I would like to come back to before too long.
okay. Well, you brought us some examples of your work, so why don't we start taking a look at that and give me a second to get it up on the screen,
Mhm.
and we can, okay, there we go. So let me get some of this out of the way here. There we go. So, this is what, from one of your first books?
Yeah, this was my first book, The Latte Rebellion, and that was published in 2011. And I had my publisher is Flux, which is a smaller publisher in the Midwest. And this has probably been so far the most successful of my books. It became a Scholastic Book Club title, which you're seeing here in this image. And I was very excited to see it placed right next to Mockingjay, which is a much, much more successful series of books. Um, so I've got that going for me. And so, yeah, that book had quite a bit of success. It's still selling some copies, and it's a project close to my heart. And the project I'm working on right now, in fact, is a sort of a follow-up book to that. So,
Ah, so tell me about it. What's the story about? Or wait a minute, you said you could read something from your introduction, or?
yeah, I can. There's a prologue that's fairly brief, and really sets up the story. Which I'll just give a very brief introduction to that, which my husband described it yesterday in a conversation as a mixed race buddy comedy, which is not how I had originally described it, but that fits pretty well.
Okay.
I did set out to write a book that was funny, but also a book that dealt with issues of being of mixed heritage, which I am myself. And I wasn't at the time seeing a lot of books about the experience of growing up with two different heritages. My dad being born in India and grew up in Pakistan and spent a lot of time in London and then came to the US. And then my mom is European American and grew up in Los Angeles. And so, and a lot of my friends growing up I had a lot of friends who were of mixed background. And so it was a topic that had been interesting to me for a long time. So that's who I decided on as my main characters.
Oh,
So I'll read this short piece. The jeering male voice came from somewhere behind me, waking me up from a heat stroke induced doze. Hey, check it out. Asha's a towelhead. I'm a what? My neck got even warmer, and not just because it was sweltering at Ashmont Community Park. Whoever it was he kidding me? Nobody used that phrase anymore, unless they were hopelessly ignorant about headwear or still carrying around a post 9/11 grudge. I knew I really should be offended. Mostly, though, I couldn't believe what I was hearing, even if I did have a towel on my head. From the gasps and nervous whispers around me, I wasn't the only one in shock. I lifted a corner of terry cloth off my sweaty face. I was tanning my legs. Just in time to see a furious Carrie dump her cup of iced coffee all over Roger Yee's smirking face. Light brown latte dripped in rivulets from his now lank and soaking black hair, down his pretentious A&F t-shirt and onto his swim trunks. The smirk dripped away with it. One of Roger's lackeys from the Asian American Club, looking up from a nearby umbrella table, saw Roger's sorry, bedraggled self and snorted cola out of his nose, starting a ripple of laughter that drifted around the pool area and then died as people noticed the confrontation. Roger had probably just been trying to make a stupid joke, but I didn't like his tone. It rubbed me the wrong way. And knowing him, he'd probably said something obscene to Carrie while I was snoozing away obliviously. Now he stood stock still and dripping as Carrie hissed, "Don't you ever use that word, butt munch. I don't call you Fu Manchu." "Well, you're half Chinese," he retorted. "Anyway, I wasn't talking to you, Wong. I was talking to Miss Barely Asian over there." He used a corner of his shirt to wipe the coffee off his face and neck. I sat up with a martyred sigh. I didn't want to be part of this conversation, but I was involved whether I liked it or not. Looky, last I checked, South Asia was definitely part of Asia. It's in the name, South Asia. I pointed to my head. And it's not a towel. Learn some useful vocabulary words like turban, which nobody in my family wears, by the way. Whatever, Roger said, waving a hand at me dismissively. You're only a quarter or a half or something anyway, and you had a towel on your head, okay? What does it matter? It's still racist, and it's not like Asha insulted you, Carrie pointed out. What's your problem? They locked eyes for a moment, glaring at each other. Roger Yee had been our nemesis ever since he'd perpetrated the backpack snatching and dumping incident of '06, which we followed rather unwisely with the toilet paper revenge caper of '07. He wasn't my favorite person, but racial epithets were being a bit low even for him. I mean, this was Northern California. We were supposed to be past all that. A handful of other seniors started to drift over from around the patio like melodrama-sniffing dogs eager for a scene. And Roger was no stranger to a good argument. He'd verbally clobbered 3 hapless rivals to become our student body secretary, which made him responsible for this stupid interclub council pool party in the first place. But if it came down to it, my money was on Carrie. She had that look in her eye, the ice-cold do not screw around with me look that she only got when she was really angry or about to nail someone on the opposing soccer team with her cleats. After a minute, Roger dropped his gaze and stalked off. As he brushed past Carrie's lounge chair, I heard him mutter, "It was just a joke, you snooty bitch." I bolted to my feet, the controversy-inspiring towel falling to the ground, innocuous and stripy. "You do not talk to my friends like that," I shouted after him, but it was too late. He was gone, slamming the iron gate to the pool area with a loud clang as he left, leaving Carrie glowering and redder than I'd ever seen her, and me torn between wanting to scream and wishing I'd decided to stay home. And that's how it all started, the Interclub Council annual pool party. Unfortunately, that's not how it ended, not by a long shot. The following April, Ashmont Unified School District boardroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," the disciplinary hearing officer cleared his throat wetly, the sound reverberating into the microphone and around the room. I didn't want to look at him with his graying comb-over and his accusatory unibrow, so I looked down at my lap, shifting in the hard wooden chair. The murmur of voices temporarily rose, then fell. I heard a few clicks of the camera shutter from the newspaper reporter in the back row. I'd been the one to request an open hearing. I had a right to, according to California Education Code. But I still couldn't believe how many people showed up. The room, which normally seated around 50 people, was full, standing room only. "Ladies and gentlemen," the presiding officer continued stiffly, "representatives of the Ashmont Board of Education, and," I could feel him glaring in my direction, "members of the public, this open disciplinary hearing to consider the expulsion of Ms. Asha Jameson from University Park High School is now in session." And that's the prologue. That's how the story starts. Then you have to read it to find out why she's getting expelled.
I'm sorry, what did you say about giving
you
it?
gotta read the book to find out why she's getting expelled.
Okay. You're not going to tell us. Huh?
No. But suffice it to say that there is a money-making scheme that spirals out of control. There is a club activity that they create for students of mixed race, and that also spins out of control. Okay. And yeah.
So, a usual question that comes up when you talk to writers is, you mentioned you are, have a, mixed background. So, are the things you're writing about, they obviously come from your life and what you're understanding, things you've experienced in that regard?
To a large extent, I would say, yeah. I mean, I almost never write directly about things that happen in my life, or else I would be writing nonfiction. Right. But I enjoy, I do enjoy looking at things I've experienced or things that my friends or family have experienced, and thinking about how I can turn those into an interesting story. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a Is there a point you're trying to make with some of this? Is there a, yeah.
Yeah. I would say that I try not to be a writer that's too heavy-handed in terms of conveying a message. I do think that one of the great things about writing, as one of my fellow children's authors has said, is that books can be both windows and mirrors. And so, depending on the reader. And so, it's important to write a variety of stories so that people can see themselves in the books that they're reading, and so that other people can, have access to a wide variety of stories and learn about, um, be exposed to what is out there and what different kinds of people have experienced. So,
Uh, so the title of the book, The Latte Rebellion, is there? Where'd that come from?
so I have to say that's actually the very first thing that came to me
Yeah.
when I first got the idea for this book, and I had no idea. I was listening to NPR, and I don't remember what the story was, but this phrase popped into my head of a latte rebellion, and I thought to myself, well, that's an interesting thing. I wonder what that might be. And there seems like there might be a story in it, and I wrote it on a post-it, and then I started thinking about it, and pretty soon this main character Asha kind of came to mind. And I thought, well, a latte is an interesting way to. I know that food metaphors are overused when it comes to describing people of color in particular, but I thought it was amusing to think that a latte is a mixture, and that
That's
became
good.
like the central metaphor for this movement that the characters decide to create.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Wonderful. Now that makes sense to me. Okay. So, what do we have up here next? Is this your,
Yeah, so underneath is my second book.
uh,
After I got my first book published with Flux, they offered me a 2-book contract after that. So these next 2 books are the next 2 that I wrote for them. Also young adult stories, a little bit different. This one is a little bit of a paranormal aspect to it, and it's a little, more of an intense story in which the character, who is also mixed race in this book, but it's not a big part of the story in this one, she suddenly develops the power to hear other people's thoughts in the wake of her cousin's suicide. And so, she's dealing with grief at the same time as she's also dealing with this new and kind of unwanted ability.
yeah, well, that would be a confusing ability to have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So can you tell us some more about the story, the plot, where it goes?
Yeah, yes. So the character Sunny is she had been very close with her cousin, and when her cousin died, she was really turned inside out, not just by the grief, but also by her new power. And it ends up becoming a story where she has to figure out who this almost new person that she is, and she ends up realizing that the people that she's had been friends with, are not necessarily people that she wants to be friends with. And so she meets some new people, and in the process of making new friends, kind of grows into a new version of herself. Coming to terms with her ability becomes a big part of it, because she confides in a couple of them, and one is trustworthy and one is not. And so that ends up complicating things quite a bit.
Uh-huh. For some reason, this it just brings up another issue that you and I were talking about, or a little tidbit you and I were talking about before we went on the air, in that you said at one time you were majoring in both art and psychology, and you thought you might be an art therapist. But I didn't pursue that. But as I told you, I did. And so one of the things that came up for me when I worked with some other artists as an art therapist, and I remember working with several writers.
Mhm.
And the thing that intrigued me about this was that some of these people seem to be working out their own problems through the characters that they were creating in their novels. And so the question is, you know, have the characters that you've created, what kind of interaction do you have with them? Uh, do they affect you? Uh, are they expressing something? Well, obviously they're expressing something of you. They're coming from you. But
Mhm.
have you ever been aware of that? The relationship you have with the characters that you create?
I mean, it's definitely something I'm aware of. I think, and I believe this is probably true for most writers. There's always, I think, a little piece of me, at least a little piece, in most of my characters. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to.
Right. Otherwise, you wouldn't relate to them and be able to express them. Right. Right.
Yeah, and so I mean, for me, these characters, especially the two in these first two novels, they're uh, dealing with being mixed race in either to a greater or lesser extent. And so I think in some ways I wouldn't say it's a necessarily always a cathartic experience, but it gives me a chance to explore some of my thoughts and feelings about various issues, and whether that makes it into the final book or not, that varies. But underneath is unfortunately, the central incident is based on something that I experienced growing up. That a step cousin of mine who I was really fond of, who was a little bit older than me, and I looked up to when we were in our early 20s. She did suicide. So
Oh,
that was something that for a number of years I had a hard time coming to terms with. And there's always a lot of unanswered questions, I think, when something like that happens. And so writing this book was, in some ways, a little bit therapeutic, because I could take some of those feelings and explore them in a little more of an abstract way, a little more indirectly.
uh-huh.
I know it's something that a lot of kids and teenagers have to deal with, um, in today's world as well. So I think it's important to not flinch away from portraying that in books.
Right. Right. And that's obviously the power of the young adult book, that you can right, experience and explore those kind of things. Well, that you need to explore as you grow up, the things that you need to learn about. I think that that's a core of most artistic expression. You
Hmm.
know. Uh, oh, the other thing that came up, this is way far afield, is I've heard people ask authors, it's like, how do you know what to write about? And the author has said something like, well, the character tells me. The characters talk to me. They tell me what to say, what they want to say. It isn't just me. Is that something you've experienced with your writing, that your characters seem to take on a life of their own?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think there's um, a deceptive sort of mysticism that comes out of that saying, that and it may be true for some people, that and I have talked to people who have said, well, it's just like I'm watching it in a movie in my head, and I'm just writing it down. um I should be so lucky. It's not quite that way for me,
Right.
but once I get to know my characters, and I have a sense of how they react in certain situations, and yeah, I do kind of, I'm someone who, I think one of my strengths as a writer is dialogue. And so writing dialogue for me, I do, um, it is almost like I'm watching and listening to them in my head, but it's not that, I still have to figure stuff out. Um,
I
it's
know.
not quite so easy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Sorry for coming at you from this direction. It's just uh, That's what I do. It popped in my head, so I thought I'd ask about it. So
Okay.
anyway, let's get back to your, where are we here? Your next one.
Yeah, so this one is my third book, The Truth Against the World, which um, doesn't feature necessarily a mixed race character, but it does deal quite a bit with culture and cultural identity. Um, and this one was a bit more of a ghost story about a family secret. So the character, her name is Wynne, and her grandmother is from Wales, and grew up in sort of the old country, or her great grandmother actually, and she is dying and wants to go back to her old home village um, during her last days, and so the family moves there for some number of months, and while she's there, some interesting stuff starts to happen as her grandmother starts to reveal some of the things that went on in her life when she was growing up. Her great grandmother lived through World War II, and a lot of sort of hardships during that time. And this one is told in alternating viewpoints. So there's another character who's a boy named Gareth who happens to um, have family in this same village, and he's the one who encounters the ghost in the story. And then as the story progresses, eventually they meet and they find that there's a connection between the two of them, and the connection is this ghost, but they don't know. The mystery then goes to them figuring out who this ghost is and why she's haunting them.
Uh-huh.
And of course, the answer is in the family secret that has been sort of buried for decades.
Okay. Right. So if you want to get the details, they need to get the book and read it. Yes. There we go.
Yeah, I don't want to give that one away. That one definitely has a reveal.
Okay. So these are the three that have been published. Are there more in the works?
Well, so if you go to the next slide, this one is my most recent publication, which came out in 2019. And so this is a graphic novel for middle graders. And so middle grade is basically the age group just younger than young adult. So about 9 to 12, age 9 to age 12-ish, more or less. And so I had an opportunity to work on this project for an educational publisher. And it was something that I had been interested in doing. I read a lot of graphic novels. I enjoy the medium of, comics, and, grew up reading comics. And so that was something that I'd had in the back of my mind for a long time. So I had the opportunity. What I did was I wrote the script, and then the artist did the cartoons. So this one was kind of a joint project between the two of us. Which was good because I think I would have been overwhelmed because of the learning curve, if I had been doing both the art and the writing for this project.
Uh-huh. So this is, where's it available? Who, has it been published? Is it used for something?
Yeah, well, so you can buy it directly from the publisher, which is Avenue A Books, or
Okay.
it's available on Amazon, I believe, as well. All of my books should be on Amazon. And so, yeah, this one I really enjoyed working on. The writing process was more like writing a script than writing a story. I mean, still a story, but instead of writing a book in paragraphs and this and that, I have to be basically describing what happens in each panel, who says what, and have a pretty strong idea of what visually is going to be laid out on the page, even if I'm not the one doing it. So that was an interesting process.
Yeah, the reason I said is, this is it a freestanding book, or was it done for something? I was just wondering, sometimes people write things that are going to be used in the schools or for a certain project or something like that. So, but this is freestanding, so to speak.
Well, yeah, that's actually an interesting that you brought that up because the publisher, Avenue A, it's an arm of a company called the Center for Responsive Schools, and they do publish curriculum. And so they started this line of books as kind of an adjunct to their curriculum publishing. They wanted to create some books that were standalone books, but that also could be usable as teaching tools in the classroom as well. So in terms of the topics, it was pretty loose. They didn't tell me what to write about, but they did say, here are some of the things that for this age group, are common, these are the developmental milestones that people are reaching. This is what we put in our curriculum that we send to those age groups. And then, think about that as you were coming up with the story kind of thing. So.
Good. Well,
so it deals with topics of friendship and bullying and things that come up, I think, in sort of 13-year-old. The character is about 13.
Well, great. I wish you all the luck with this. Let's see where it goes.
That was a really fun one. And the next slide is just shows the first couple of pages and how those turned out. So, I just was really happy to see it finally, the images coming into life, after I had written the script. So,
yeah. Very nice. Okay. And what do we have next here? We have.
Yeah, so this was just, I also write short fiction. And I've had a couple of short stories published here and there. And one of them was in this anthology from Main Street Rag. And the cool fiction of lists. So it was kind of a broad theme, but I had a story that fit it. And the funny thing is the editor here, Lisa Renfro, is somebody that I went to middle school and high school with and got back in touch with later. And she had always been a really excellent writer as well. And so she had gone into, I think, writing and teaching and stuff. And so after we got back in touch, she said, I'm doing this project. If you have something that you might like to submit to it. And so I did.
Yeah. So it's the fiction of lists. So it was, what was your contribution here? Did you, was it a certain or something? Is that what this is about?
So, I think people took the contributors of stories for this anthology, took it in a number of different directions, which was very cool to see and be part of. For me, I had this short story called Geometries that was really kind of, for me, an experiment in language in some respects. I had just taken a class in grad school where we had read a lot of Gertrude Stein, which was challenging and interesting. And I would say that I liked some parts of it more than others, but it definitely inspired me to think in a little bit of a different way. And so I had this story that kind of almost was a litany of the characters. Character collected souvenirs from different times in her life and different experiences, and like almost like this collection. And so that's kind of where the list element came in.
Okay. Yeah. Very nice. So tell us about this. What is this?
Yeah. So one of my main media when I was going to school for art was etching, printmaking. So this is a multi-plate etching. And this was in a portfolio of works by a number of different artists that my husband is also, Robert is also in this portfolio. A number of artists that we had met at the San Francisco Art Institute. And so one of them had put together this portfolio project that we each contributed a piece to. And then there were several copies of this because, one of the great things about printmaking is you can make multiple copies of your
Yeah.
work. And so it was shown in a couple of shows, the portfolio of works, and then the organizer sent a copy to the Metropolitan Museum of Art's paper collection. So I can say I have a piece in the Met, although it's probably stored in some storage shelf somewhere in the basement. But yeah, so I wanted to kind of, for people who might not know much about how etching works, the next couple of slides have a little bit of a demo of that.
Okay.
So it's kind of an unusual medium. It's a very, I don't want to say old-fashioned, but I suppose in a way it's, one of the original mass media is printmaking. And so with etching, you basically drawing or scratching a design into a copper plate. Then you rub ink into those lines and wipe the rest of it away. And then when you run it through the press with a piece of paper, then of course the ink gets transferred to the paper. And that's a very, sort of in a nutshell, what's going on there. So this is me with a plate that I was in the process of working on. And as you can see, it can be a rather messy process. And then the next slide is a picture of what it looks like when it is been run through the press. So this is the press that we have at home in our home studio. It's a Conrad etching press, and it's a really big, heavy piece of equipment. And so this was really kind of the center, the heart of our home art studio. And I've just, in this image, just run a print through it.
Yes. So you've mentioned several times your husband is an artist. So this is what, is he a printmaker too? Like,
a printmaker, and in fact, it's kind of a funny story that we. It's a little embarrassing as well, which is that we met in an etching class, which made for some jokes at the beginning.
Joke about, would you like to come up and see my etchings? Something exactly. Like that.
Yeah. So for a while, we actually were not, super open about the fact that we had met each other and everything, but we did meet in an etching class at Berkeley, and so that's something that we have shared, which is great because it's not a very easy process to do if you don't have access to the equipment and materials.
This is a major piece of equipment. It's a major commitment if you're going to be in this area. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this is your own in your home or in your studio, you said?
Yeah. We have a studio that we built onto our house. So, it's out in the studio. And it also, besides being an etching press, you can also do block prints on it, which is what I have in the next slide here. As kind of a silly one. It's a Christmas card that I did, but this is a linoleum cut. And so that's a different printmaking process where you carve into the block of linoleum and then you roll the ink across the surface before running it through the printing press. And so I've done various block prints here and there. It's a medium that I really would like to do more of because it's relatively inexpensive to get the linoleum blocks. And so that allows for a lot of experimentation, I think.
Yeah, I understand. I think we're going to have your husband on this show in the future. So I can't wait. I can't wait to learn more about this process.
Yeah, I'm really happy to, I'm sure, talk about that. He's got a lot of really cool work that he has displayed locally at Stan State and at the Carnegie as well. So.
Okay, and where do we go next here? Here we go.
Okay, so this is a kind of a transition slide because what this was a project I was commissioned to do by an artist in Berkeley, whose name is Jim Rosenow. And he has this studio he calls This Into That. And he collects old books and he turns them into sculpture objects. So actually, I can show you one. I didn't even think to put a slide of it, but I have one that he made for me. He makes these interesting objects where this is a shelf that's supposed to go on the wall and then put stuff on, and it's got pen. And so this is just what he does. He makes all kinds of like clocks and shelves and other objects. And every year for Christmas, he commissions another artist to do his holiday cards, essentially. And what he wanted to do was he wanted to take these old book jackets that he has collected from, taking the jackets off the books that he then turns into sculptures. He wanted to take the jackets and turn them, have something printed over the top of them and turn them into like a little almost collage type piece. And so that's a couple of these just random book covers with this quote, "No furniture so charming as books," which is what he wanted to put. And it was a really neat project to get to work on. Sort of a collaboration with another artist, which is, I'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit, but collaboration has been a really fruitful thing for me as well as an artist.
Yeah, because that would be my obvious question was, how do you, or what was your participation in this, or?
Yeah, well, I made them. So I carved a linoleum block with this quote on it. And then there's a process, a printmaking process called sheen collé, where you are attaching a piece of paper onto the other piece of paper. That's a terrible description. You're essentially sandwiching usually a decorative piece of paper and then printing on top of that, and then by running it through the press, they all adhere together. And so you can use that as a technique. So essentially, that is what I did with book covers. So there's a backing paper, and then the cover, and then the print.
Okay. What
so
do we have?
Slides, yeah. So I became really interested as I was doing printmaking at the Art Institute. I had a chance to take a couple of classes in artists' books and bookmaking. And, that for obvious reasons was really up my alley, just as an area to explore. So, I learned how to make different types of book structures. This is an example of a binding that I did. I learned how to do the bindings. You learn how to cover and do the end papers. It's really was fascinating to explore, not just, blank books, but also books as an art object in and of themselves. And so I had a couple of pieces in shows at that time, artist book shows, and had even sold a few of them. And then the next slide is another book project that I did just kind of for fun. It's a structure called a Jacob's ladder. And it is neat because it closes up, as you can see, into this very small square. But then when you open it up, you can kind of rearrange the pages, the little squares, they flip flop over each other, and it's really a neat item. So that was something that I came to a bit later that I would really like to go back to, is making these book structures and exploring, that as coming back to that medium.
Yeah, it's an art form that doesn't get much publicity, or we don't see much of.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, and it is definitely an art form. I can see you want to go back and be creative with this. Very
much. Really if you think of, I think in some ways the earliest book artist, the person who gets credit for being one of the earliest book artists is William Blake. because he did these, wonderful poems that he then hand wrote and did all this illustration around, and then, essentially made his own books out of. And so, there's a lot of potential, I think, for combining art and writing in interesting ways.
Ah. Well, I hope you continue to do more of this. This would be an interesting display or exhibit to see.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, if I, if I, one of these days, once I get back to doing more visual art, yeah, that's something I would really enjoy.
yeah. Well, keep us in mind at Michelin Gallery and find a place to exhibit some of this stuff. It's fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah.
So where are we
Um,
here?
yeah. So the next few are just, I'm generally, as you have seen, a works on paper kind of person. So I do. This is a piece that I sold to someone that I went to grad school with. It's just a figurative piece that I did in charcoal. Um, my, I really like just the feel of drawing from life is something that you just, it's not only is it something that you need to learn as an artist usually, but there's something very direct about it that, really that I connect with for whatever reason. And so, this figure, I go back to the figure quite a bit in my work. The next one is another slightly more recent one. And so this one is Conte pencil on toned paper. And so, yeah, these are just figure studies, but it's a really good way to stay in practice as well.
Yeah, right. So you're one of these Renaissance people. There's no end to your talent. You go in all different directions, and
Well, I like to do there are a lot of different, I have a lot of different interests. And I, feel fortunate that I've been able to explore so many of them, um, in my life so far. And
uh-huh.
a lot of it is an exploration process of figuring out what I like to do the most and what I can do and what's feasible in terms of, what can I sort of do regularly as a career as
Yeah.
opposed to, a hobby.
Oh,
Hobby was
well,
a bad word in my house as a kid. That's what my dad would always say. Well, art's a good hobby, but he kept living.
well, I'm enjoying your explorations here. They're wonderful.
Yeah, this is a mixed media painting that I did. That was kind of a tribute to my grandfather. Um, and he had been in World War II. He was in Pearl Harbor and survived. He was on the West Virginia. This is my mom's dad, and he had a big role in my life when I was growing up. So he always lived nearby and everything. So I had made this painting kind of in tribute to him, with some old photos that I used this technique called laser tran to sort of transfer onto the canvas, and then I did some painting and drawing over that. So yeah, this kind of goes back to me enjoying this sort of mixture of media.
Yeah.
And so the next two, it's actually a two-parter that I was kind of playing around with. This was a time when we had a lot of people going to Afghanistan, and the situation was really terrible over there. And then there were, people who were being detained, either, with cause or without cause. And so I had that kind of going through my head. And then also the idea that at the time there's a lot of misinformation about Muslim people going around, and my dad's side of the family is Muslim, and so that was, something that really frustrated me. And while I'm not a religious person in any way. It's something that obviously I learned about growing up and that I have, a family connection to. And so, I had this, thought that I would make the two-parter. It's called Screened. And so I have this picture of me behind a screen, and then I have this picture of me behind a fence. It's the same picture.
Huh.
And so I was just kind of playing with that imagery.
Yeah.
And again, I'm using that sort of transfer process, laser tran, to get the photographic type image on there, and then the paint is acrylic.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so the next few, these are some illustration design type of projects that I've done. This is something that I probably have been doing almost as long as I've been doing the writing. And I did a chapbook cover for a local poet, Gordon Preston. So I did the artwork that's on the
cover. So these are examples of your artwork then, your graphic arts?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So, and then a local publication I think in this area called Snail Mail Review had me do a couple of drawings for a couple of their covers. It's also like a small journal, literary journal. And so I had a lot of fun with that. And that was one where, all three of these, the person had an idea of what they wanted. And so I, tried to adhere to that. And I've continued to do that. So the next one is most recently, this is a book that's coming out in, I believe, July. My good friend Gary Thomas, who's a poet here in the Modesto area, and he's having his first book-length collection of poems coming out soon. And so he asked me to do artwork for the cover, and I was pleased to do that.
Very nice. Yeah, I do know Gary. We have a show we call Collision where we combine photographers and poets to work on collaborative pieces. So yeah, I do know. I think I worked with Gary once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Here.
Oh, so this is actually a page out of my book, The Latte Rebellion. And I had some cartoons that I had drawn that did end up making it into the book, which I was really pleased. I've always kind of enjoyed cartooning and have done a little dabbling in that, and started to do it a little bit more seriously. At one point as a kid, I did want to be a cartoonist, and I don't think I had really much clue what that meant at the time. But again, as you can see, I've worked on a graphic novel, and I've done some cartoons for different purposes. And these are mostly for fun. The cartoon stuff is just So I did a lot of these for my writing blog, just writing silly writing related cartoons.
I'm scrolling through them because we're coming towards the end of the hour and I'm wanting to get all this in here. So
yeah. So, this was a fun one. I enjoyed putting that together. And so I did a lot of those for a while. This is the Sybil's Awards that I'm involved with, the Bloggers Awards. And I also do some of their graphic design since it's a volunteer endeavor. So I did the logo there that you can see.
Okay.
I've done some work for the Prospect Theater here in town. This was before they moved to their K Street location.
Nice.
For a few years, I did their graphic design. And then this is a collaborative project that I worked on with my husband. He did the images, and then he did them inspired by one of my short stories. So what he ended up doing was create this installation.
Where was this exhibited?
So this is in the Stan State Gallery.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and here's a detail.
Yeah, that's a detail. Yeah. So on one side, it's kind of a loose leaf book, essentially. with
Okay.
the text on one side and the image on the other.
Yeah, it reminds me of our collision show. You have a picture on one side and a poem on the other.
Yeah, yeah. Another collaborative project that I did ended up getting written about in this magazine called Graphic Impressions. The images on the next page actually show the project, which was a very interesting thing. It was called the Print Exchange Project. And there were 10 of us who were women and who were alumni, all of the San Francisco Art Institute's printmaking program. And we did this exchange where we each, created a print of the same size, and then everybody sent everybody else a copy of the print that then they altered in any way that they wanted to alter it. And so ultimately it ended up in 100 different pieces made up of all of our work kind of combined in an interesting way. And then that got exhibited in San Francisco. I think it was the Art Seed Gallery.
Here a little bit. So
Yeah.
This looks like where you're in a bookstore.
Yeah, this is the Modesto Barnes and Noble. They did a really cool writing event a few years ago that involved a lot of local authors coming in for readings and other, talks and things like that. And so I was one of the authors that they brought in. And it was really fun. One of the things that I do, as a writer, you end up having to make a lot of these kind of appearances and, getting your work out there and meeting other writers and meeting readers can be a really rewarding thing. This is in front of the library. They have a local author fair that they've done. This was the Great Valley Book Fest, which takes place in Manteca, which I don't know if they did it last year. I'm not sure if they've gone back to doing it yet, but.
Okay.
Oh yeah, and I participated in this event as well, which took place, was organized at the new Project Theater, which was a reading in support of the Peace Life Center's KCBP radio station.
Well, we have filled the hour with wonderful examples of your art. I really appreciate you taking the time to share it with us.
Thank you so much for,
I mean, I can't wait to see more of your work, and as you continue to explore, your explorations are very intriguing and interesting.
I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah. So, gee, hope to see you around. Hope to see you at our gallery. Hope to see you, wherever you exhibit things. Keep us informed. If you and your husband do another joint show, that would be great to see.
Yeah, I know he's interested, and I certainly would like to. So we'll see where it goes.
So anyway, thank you so much for joining us. It was nice meeting you. And as I say, I truly enjoy all of your artistic explorations. So
thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Okay. Okay. So goodbye for now.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Here.